Welcome to MILDURA. My name is William Chaffey, but everyone around here knows me as WB. When I look around at this fine city today and see how important this region has become, it's hard to realize the way things used to be before my brother George and I even heard of this wonderful place. So, let me take you back to that historic time and give you some idea of what it was all about. Back in the early 1880s, George and I were very much concerned with developing ways to improve agricultural irrigation methods in the state of California.
But in 1885, Mr. Alfred Deakin, chairman of Victoria's Royal Commission on Water Supply and Irrigation, and a future Prime Minister, made that long journey from Australia to study the Chaffey's irrigation methods. And what he saw inspired him to consider similar developments along the Murray River.
George arrived on the scene in 1886, and he could see the potential of this region straight away. So much so, in fact, that he cabled me and said, "Sell our interests in California and join me here," which I did later that year.
So, in October 1886, the brothers signed with the Victorian government what was known as the Chaffey Agreement, and in 1887 were authorised to begin work on the first great irrigation colony at Mildura. In that year, they also signed an agreement with the South Australian government for a similar project downriver at Renmark. There was certainly a lot of groundwork to do, but George Chaffey's engineering skill and experience, plus his considerable drive and enthusiasm, soon had the project up and ready to go.
George was a self-taught marine engineer, and he based his pump designs on steamship engines, which resulted in mighty pumps like this to get the water where we wanted it. With George supplying the water, and with a bit of horticultural know-how from me, our dream of an oasis in the semi-desert of Australia was literally blossoming at our feet.
Over the next few years, settlers arrived here from many parts of Australia and overseas, and by 1891, the enormous promise and potential of the region had resulted in major plantings, born from a genuine atmosphere of hope and optimism.
By 1889, I'd become so attached to this region and was so sure of its future that I decided to build a home for my family here. We called it Rio Vista, which really means river view. And given the vision that George and I had for the mighty River Murray, it seemed a most appropriate name. As well as being a great place for my family, Rio Vista was also where George and I made some very important decisions about our irrigation development plans.
As the plantings became established, the early harvests became progressively more encouraging. But the promised rail link had yet to arrive, and seasonal variations in the river levels made transport by paddle steamers unreliable.
To start with, we had to find some way to preserve the fruit harvest, so we weren't totally reliant on the dependability of river transportation, and drying them in the hot Mildura sun proved to be an excellent alternative.
It might have been a bit crude to start with, but it worked. And the fact that it worked at all was a tribute to the effort and determination of the Mildura settlers, who surmounted seemingly impossible odds to create a genuine future for the region. As things progressed, the Chaffeys brought in some experts to improve the general techniques. But in 1893, just when the growers had enjoyed their best harvest to date, the Murray River dropped even more dramatically than normal. The wharves were idle, and much of the harvest was literally stranded. To make things worse, Mildura's sole banking service, the First National Bank, closed its doors, part of a statewide depression that was to hit everyone very hard. And if that wasn't enough, the salt levels, which had always been present in the soil, began to rise, causing severe damage to the newly established trees and vines. Also, George Chaffey's innovative and carefully planned system of water channels were proving inadequate in this crisis, and were starting to fall apart. In fact, Everything started to fall apart for the Chaffey brothers at this time. Their company went into liquidation, followed by a royal commission in 1896, which found them guilty of mismanagement.
George and I did what we could, of course, but by then, most of the growers were starting to leave the district. And the general feeling of frustration and depression made it that much more harder to keep the dream alive. Yet it was during this period of seeming disaster that the ultimate success of the Sunraysia district came into being.
January 1896 saw the inaugural meeting of the first Mildura Irrigation Trust, which effectively placed the region's irrigation management in the hands of the settlers themselves. All this was a bitter blow to George, and although WB tried to persuade him to stay, he returned to California in 1897, a disillusioned man. Despite his personal losses and disappointments, W.B. Chaffey worked tirelessly with the settlers to help them realise the full potential of the region. And when the long-promised railway link finally arrived in Mildura in 1903, he saw that the way was now open for transportation access to markets throughout Australia and overseas.
Over the years, many people have come to Australia in search of a dream. And though the one George and I shared had some problems along the way, it finally did come true. I'm proud that my old home still stands, not just as a memory of those early days, but as a center of art and culture for today's generation, which is a very rewarding way to be remembered.